grace to you, and welcome back to another video. If you're new to this channel, my name is Caleb. Welcome, and I would appreciate it if you would like this video and subscribe if it brings you any benefit. Okay, let's jump right into this. I did an informal debate, I think it was called, with someone. This is, over a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now, and we were talking about the deity of Christ. And these are questions that I get on a regular basis when it comes to Christ's deity and why it's imperative that Jesus is divine according to our theology. Well, these are good questions, and they're questions that need to be addressed. One of the things that continues to come up is this idea of a emissary or an agency. So the person that I had a informal debate with was Kingdom in Context, Sean at Kingdom in Context. Now, I think that there was some underhanded things that went on in the editing there, but nonetheless, Sean brought up the idea of agency in that video. He talked about agency and how it was a biblical concept. Okay, well, there is a biblical concept of agency, or what is called a shaliach, or a sent one. We see this throughout Scripture. The problem is that people try to apply this to Christ, to Jesus, but it doesn't actually work quite that way. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. So let's give some examples of what a sent one or what is called a shaliach would be. So the prophets might be considered a sent one. There's somebody who represents God and comes and speaks for God. Okay. So when we think of the role of agent or of shaliach from a biblical perspective in terms of the prophets, obviously these people are not given divine status. They're not seen or equated with God in any way, shape, or form. They are clearly defined as people who represent God's voice, but they are in no way made to be God. We don't see the scriptures, we don't see the prophets saying that they are God. We don't see the prophets taking the place of God. We don't see the prophets doing anything like that. There's no reference that would make us think that the prophet is claiming to be the one who has sent them. Okay, so that's number one. If we move on, even into the New Testament, in the New Testament we have the apostles. They are they're apostles. They're sent ones. This is exactly what their role is. Once again, we don't see any of the apostles. We don't see Paul saying, I'm Christ, or anything like that. We don't see any reference that these people would in any way represent God in terms of beyond just presenting theological concepts, and or if they're a prophet, maybe what God has said to them. So this is another point. But ultimately, where this idea comes from is a misrepresentation, or maybe it's not a misrepresentation, but a misassociation with a suzerain vassal treaty. So I'm going to explain this concept a little bit, and I want you to try to stay with me as best you can. So in the ancient Near East, and we're talking about like 1500s BCE, suzerain vassal treaties were made between kings and their vassals. Now, the king would be called the suzerain, and the vassal, or the under king, or the regent king, would be called a vassal. So a suzerain, great king, vassal, under king. Okay, so what would happen is a king would come in and he'd conquer a land. And so let's try to bring this into modern day. How could we do this? Okay, so let's pretend that let's just say that there's a king that comes in and he conquers a land, okay? And he takes you as a captive king, okay? You're the king over this land. He comes and he conquers. And maybe you're a governor or something, and he wants to make sure that the people in that land, he's not going to stay there, he's going to go back to his own land, but he wants to make sure that the people in that land are going to stay subject to him. And he knows that you are actually subject to him and loyal to him. So what he does is he writes up a contract and basically says, look, you're going to act as me while I'm gone. While I'm gone, whatever you say, it's as if I say it. Now, if you go against this covenant, then I am going to crush you. Okay. But ultimately, if you keep it, then you act as me. You have all my power and everything. And basically, it's as if you're my child. In fact, we hear language in suzerain vassal treaties like begotten. Okay. So how does this relate to the Bible? Well, we see actually in the Bible, we see a document that is formed after a suzerain vassal treaty. In fact, there's been a lot of great work by scholars such as Dr. Meredith Kline. He did great work back in I think it was the 70s or so. He did a book called Treaty of the Great King. And what he shows is, and there are modern scholars who have shown this as well. There's actually a lot of different scholars who have talked about this. But what Kline showed was that the book of Deuteronomy is actually structured after a suzerain vassal treaty of the 1400s BCE. And basically what we see is that Moses, or God, however you want to see this, structured this so that the Israelites would understand it. And what we see in that is a suzerain vassal treaty. And Dr. Block, Daniel Block, has done good work on this too in his book, The Gospel According to Moses. He shows also, he talks about the book of Deuteronomy being structured after a suzerain vassal treaty. All of the elements are there. It's structured in the exact same way. There's witnesses, there's blessings and curses, and all these kinds of different things. Okay, so why does this matter? Well, it matters because what people are attempting to say is that Jesus is in fact a vassal, that God is the great king, and that Jesus is the vassal over his people. There's two major problems with this. Number one, we never see in any situation that I'm aware of, at least, we never see two vassals ruling the same place. And the fact is that Deuteronomy is set up as a suzerain vassal treaty. And who is the vassal in that treaty? Israel is the vassal in that treaty, not Christ. And so to say that Israel is the vassal over the land of Israel for God, and that Jesus is the vassal over that land as well, this is completely contrary to everything that we know about suzerain vassal treaties. That's number one. So in that respect, when we talk about that, what I'm saying is there's no way that Christ could be the vassal or the shaliach or the agent over Israel, since we already have a vassal there, which is Israel, the people of Israel. They are entrusted with the covenant, with the suzerain vassal covenant of Deuteronomy. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that within the suzerain vassal treaties, we never see the works of a great king being attributed to the vassal king. In other words, the vassal never says, I did this, I did that. But in the scriptures, not only do we see Christ claiming to be God in places like John 8:58, John claims that Jesus is God in John 1. There's multiple different places that we could go. Philippians 2, so on and so forth. The point is that Christ claims to be God, and we never see this in a suzerain vassal treaty. So that would disqualify him in terms of being a suzerain vassal. But in places like Colossians, we see in Colossians 1:15 and following, we see, and other places, mind you, we see that Christ is given the works of the great king, which is the works of creation, are attributed to Christ, to Jesus. So the idea that an agent would take such credit for something that the great king did is absolutely not found in any examples in the ancient Near East. And so just in the idea of the way that the scriptures talk about Jesus and talk about Christ throughout Scripture, from the very beginning all the way through to the end, this is not the relationship of a suzerain vassal treaty. Rather, what the Scriptures claim is that Jesus is the great king. He is the one who is the suzerain. He's not the vassal. He is the suzerain. This is the way that the Scriptures talk about Christ. And this is one of the reasons that I firmly believe and will argue that there's no way that Jesus can be the agent of God. He is God, and this is the way that scriptures talk about it. I hope that this video has done something for you. I hope that it's uplifted you and maybe you've learned something, and I will see you in the next video.